Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Well, on today's program, we are taking a deep dive into fish identification. And my next guest has had somewhat of a bittersweet relationship with that topic.
Thanks, Michael. I just want to say thank you for inviting me. Basically, where School of Fish started was way back in the day. I graduated from the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, and I was offered a position at Golder Associates as a junior fisheries technician. And the funny thing was, I wasn't passionate about a fish at all. It wasn't really my thing that I wanted to do. So I kind of jumped in head first and thought, well, what better way to get full-time work out of school as a technical diploma? And I thought, no, this will be great. So it took a few years to kind of understand what my role was, but where it started with Fish ID was doing a lot of fish rescues, a lot of work encompassed to do remove fish from certain locations. And the thing is, with that, we had to make sure we're identifying the fish correctly. But when you look at the typical textbooks, a lot of them have illustrations or a lot of them are fish that you would have to kill. But when we're out in the field, we need to identify it quickly and correctly. And sometimes it's really hard when you're fumbling through a book. So what I decided to do was after I had what I call a catastrophic failure, is I misidentified a bunch of fish wrong, and the Alberta environment biologist said, you know what, we're not going to accept your data into our database. So I'm going to tell everybody that you did it wrong. And I thought, uh-oh. And my heart kind of dropped and I thought, oh no, I just ruined my career as a fisheries person and I just started. But what that did was it pushed me forward to let's get lots of pictures. Let's find the right features. Let's do something to make sure everybody doesn't go through that. And it was a really great learning lesson for me. After that point, I made sure I took a ton of photos. I documented key features. I attended the Trout Unlimited fish rescue that occurs down south by Calgary and into Lethbridge into Waterton, and learned some great materials from so many different biologists and technicians and anglers. So it led into a lot of different asking people to, hey, what do you think that fish is? What is a good feature to look for that makes it easy so we don't kill it? Because especially a lot of the larger fish, I'm an angler as well. I want to be able to catch and release and put them back in. And basically, throughout my career, I had such a huge collection of photos. So I thought, well, I'm going to make it something easy that I could use. So when I'm in the field, I could just revert to it. And back in the day, we had Right in the Rain waterproof paper. So I printed a few just for me. And it went well with everybody else. So I thought, okay, well, this is a lot of fun. And basically in 2015, when the Alberta recession hit, it basically forced a lot of us into layoffs from the environmental consulting days. And I thought, well, you know what? If I'm unemployed, what better way to maybe write a field guide? I already have it all prepared. And I found the right printer. And basically, it kind of just, I don't know, it just turned into a dream that turned into a kind of a reality, I guess is what I like to put it.
And I guess there's so much I want to get into with you here, but that dream almost became a nightmare, I guess, going back to that initial, not to dig up the past there, but for a lot of folks, making that kind of, as you call it, a catastrophic mistake may have just been enough to say, well, maybe I better find some other career path to take.
And that's honestly what it almost happened. It really pushed me over the edge to I like to have things correct. I like to have it right. And it was it was just the right push I needed in the right direction. And from that moment on, it's always taught me that, you know what, it's okay that things go wrong. It can push you in the right direction. And honestly, it gave me such passion to understand what these fish are. And the more I looked into it, the more I educated myself, I started realizing a lot of people struggle with fish ID. And a lot of people say it's very technical, it's bottom level. But the point is, if you can't identify your fish, you can't do a lot of research, you can't do a lot of statistics. Everything starts with that technical part of being in the field and understanding, okay, which fish am I looking at? And for me, it was a lot of the small bodied fish that I really struggled with. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to photograph them. I started learning that if you have them in an aquarium, it's more ethical. Plus, it's easier to see those features. But then it's something that, as I learned as I went on, that I wanted to educate others so they wouldn't have to go through what I did. And it made me feel excited because it got me excited about teaching, and it led to teaching, and it led to books. And it's having people understand that if it's a pike, or if it's northern pike, if it's a walleye, or if it's a trout, we need to know what we're looking at, because it all is interconnected, and it all starts with identifying your fish correctly.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time in Alberta where to fish on certain creeks along the eastern slope, you had to pass an exam to be able to distinguish between West Slope cutthroat and brookies and those type of species, and that's not an easy thing to do when you are looking at juvenile fish. I mean, that becomes a real challenge. And does it have black? Are the spots there? All that kind of thing. So it does become an interesting exercise when fishing in areas where you really have to be careful about what you are keeping and what you are allowed to, or we should be putting back.
For sure. And I think that's where I struggled for years. So I basically started really getting into Fish ID about 2008. I didn't really get into printing the book until about 2015. And now we're 5 years later, it's 2020. And I still struggle with field identification. And what I tell a lot of people is that it's okay to call it an unknown. And I learned that from the Royal Ontario Museum Fish Identification course. And I was fascinated because it was 3 days of just identifying Ontario fish. And it struck me that, you know what, it's okay if we can't identify it, but then we need to put it back and say, we'll call it an unknown. But there's so many people that guess at it that, you know what, it's really hard with juvenile trout, because even the seasoned angler could look at it and say, it could be this. But if you don't have the right picture to look at it, or if you're not looking at it in the right angle, there's the hybridization factor. There's so many things we need to think about. And that's why I'm okay saying to people that it is a struggle. It is hard. If you could take it back as a preserved specimen, that's the best way to do it. But a lot of the times that's really quite unrealistic for if it's anglers or even biologists that we don't have the resources. There's a lot of
Sorry to interrupt. You keyed in on something that I absolutely wanted to touch base with you on, and that is the hybridization. I mean, we're seeing tiger trout here in Alberta becoming just a really hot commodity, I guess is the best way to put it. But other fish are being cross-pollinated, whether it be in a hatchery or it's in the wild, and that just throws yet another curveball, doesn't it?
It sure does, because when you look at some of those features, I was at the Trout Unlimited Fish Rescue a couple years ago. I haven't made it in a couple years, but longnose dace and lake chub hybridize. That's something I didn't even consider. So that's just the small body fish world. And when you get into cutthroat versus brook trout, there's so much hybridization that you'll look at something, for example, a bull trout and a brook trout, and you're not sure. You're looking, and even me as a seasoned person that does Fish ID on a regular basis, I'll still look at it and think to myself, I don't know what this is. And that's fully okay as well. If you don't know what it is and you're a recreational fisher, put it back. That's the best thing you can do. Maybe take a quick photo, try to keep all the fish wet, try to keep your hands wet. But it's okay not to know, because it does come down to the art and the science. And there's a lot of dichotomous keys that get really, I find, overcomplicated. And sometimes you just need to have that fish as a dissected specimen. You might actually have to send it in for DNA results to understand what that hybridization is. And that's where I think fish identification doesn't get enough census to really push it forward, because if you're not starting at that field aspect of, do you know what fish you're looking at, it's hard to understand what data we're looking at. And how do you manage a fisheries if we don't know if the anglers are identifying them right, or if we don't know the fly fishers are fishing for, what if they're fishing for bull trout and bringing it home because we don't have enough people to enforce the rules, which there's a lot of unknowns. And I think it's something quite simple and easy that we could work with everybody to just, because I know in hunting, you have to identify a mule deer versus a white-tailed deer. And I think fisheries management has come so far in everything that we have done. I'm super proud of Alberta and everything they're doing. The fisheries biologists are doing amazing. And I think just a few more steps forward in educating the general public and educating biologists is definitely my goal and my passion, to really get people to understand that it's not easy when you're out in the field. And I've had those grass fish where I'm looking at a fish, oh, grass fish, and all of a sudden it's gone or it's back in the water. And that's fully okay to say, you know what, I don't know what it is. It might be a hybrid. Here's some photos, submit your information to the Alberta Biologists, and they're more than happy to see specimens if you can. But photos is 1,000 words as well, too.
Well, we are this past year here in Alberta anyways, and I guess to some degree due to the COVID situation, but we saw an increase of about 30% in terms of the number of anglers that picked up licenses this year. And I guess being able to head out and be comfortable with knowing the species that you're fishing, being able to identify them goes a long way to ensuring that fish remain part of our future, doesn't it?
Exactly, because if you think of, I did a project when I was in university about recreational angling and the millions of dollars that go into it. If it's fly fishing or if it's spin casting, if all of a sudden the fish start to disappear, that industry is going to go down. I know a lot of fly fishing guides that do it as their livelihood. So in my retrospect, we need to be able to protect something that's out there. And if it's a small body fish, if it's a large body fish. And I just want to give a shout out to Jim Stelfox, because he wrote a lot of different articles about how anglers are misidentifying the fish. And that could be up to 80%. And that's really quite alarming when you think of, can an angler that's seasoned for 10 years, if they can't identify their fish properly, which it's hard. And I understand fully that you can't just bring a massive book with you in the field. And that's why I decided to print my guides. They're light, they're waterproof, they're tear resistant. So you could take them out in the bush with you, and you're not gonna have to buy one every year, because they should last quite a while. Because that's the thing where we need to start. If we're catching all these bull trout and people don't understand what a bull trout is, because you just buy a license and you go, and like you said, that 30% increase can really affect a population. Because I know a lot of people coming in from out of town that have come to my Fish ID workshop saying, okay, I know everything about Ontario. I know absolutely nothing about Alberta. And it warms my heart that they're willing to get educated. But a lot of people don't even know where to start. That you do have some really good photos, I find, illustrations in the fisheries regulations, but sometimes those fishery regulations, I've noticed, have got a little bit overcomplicated, but they still try to do their best to say, you know what, make sure you know your fish before you go out, but it's not sanctioned that we should have something pushing it forward. And I think there should be something to say, you know what, at least go try to educate yourself. Because I know if I've Googled a yellow perch online, some of the items that come up, I thought, oh my goodness, that is not even close to a yellow perch. I don't know what you're talking about. And if we're relying on people Googling, it definitely, I get frustrated super fast about that. So.
Well, interesting you bring up Jim Stelfox, because he was the man that administered my field fish identification test. And talk about pressure. Happy to say I did pass, however. Shona, before I let you go, how do folks, I mean, hey, here we are on the doorstep to Christmas. Maybe ordering your book would be a perfect gift for the angler in the family. How do folks get a hold of you so that they could get a copy of your field guide?
Oh, excellent. Yeah, there's a few different ways. I have actually just worked with the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology bookstore. So the books are available at Shop at Neat. I also print as well, so they could send me an email personally. And the other aspect is you could go to my website, which is schooloffishid.com, and all the information is there. My email's there, my phone number. So there's lots of different ways that I'm hoping I could get to people. And the first stop I would say is Shop at Neat. You just type in Fishes of Alberta, and I also have Fishes of Saskatchewan. And everybody could get what they need. I also ship too, just for a little bit of an extra cost.
And I really want to thank Shona for taking time out of her schedule to talk to us about fish identification, the importance of it. And again, if you have an angler in your family, I think this would be a great resource to present to them over the Christmas holiday. And I would be remiss if I didn't bring up this book. It goes back to 2003, 2004. Amanda Joint and Michael Sullivan were the authors of this book, and it also a great resource if you can still find it. I would also highly recommend you picking it up, as it dives right into quite a number of species of fish to be found here in Alberta. Well, that is it for us this time around. We'll be back with one more Let's Go Outdoors edition before we head into the Christmas break. So stay tuned. We'll talk to you a little bit later on this week.